Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Biz Dev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter, your host, and I'm joined, per usual, by Gary Voigt, who is the proud owner. He just purchased this off of eBay, a 1987 waterbed. How's that going for you, man?
Yeah, I didn't quite think that through. I live in Florida and it's very hot, so it's not really a waterbed as much as it is a microwave. It feels
Did
like
you fix
sleeping
all
in
the
a
holes?
microwave.
When you first
Oh,
filled it up, I heard there was lots of holes. It just kind of sprayed all over the room.
we saw this infomercial with this like black goop stuff that you're supposed to be able to put on a screen door and use it as a boat.
You just slapped
So
it.
we're trying that out, and so
Uh-huh.
far it's okay, but we'll see.
I saw one of those infomercials where the dude slaps one of those patches on like a boat that had like a massive hole in it.
I think it was the guy from what was that sitcom? The Tool Time sitcom.
Tim Allen? Yes. Man, that was my jam.
Anyway,
Alan?
yeah,
His name was Alan, right? No.
Yeah. My parents
Yeah.
had a waterbed back in the
My
day.
dad had one. So more importantly, this is not a waterbed podcast. More importantly, we are joined by Ravi Kurani, who is the CEO of Sutro, and we're going to talk all sorts of stuff about his startup journey in just a minute. But what do you think of waterbeds, Ravi? I mean, let's get into the serious stuff.
You know, I remember growing up, my aunt and uncle used to have one. And as little kids, we would always jump on every single bed, and then we basically just punctured a hole, and I didn't see one after that. So that's that's the extent of my story with a waterbed.
My father had one in the 80s. My dad was single at the time, and he had just the most 80s pad you can imagine. It was.
Did he have a projection TV? Please tell me.
No, he had
and a laser disc player.
indoor
Oh wait, that's 90s.
spa.
Ooh.
In his house. Like he sold houses. That's my dad did that for 40 something years. And he sold houses in the 80s. He was killing it, just living large, and he'd never saved anything. So he spent it all on just glorious. He had a waterfall in his backyard. I mean, and the houses back in the 80s were small, right? They weren't these massive things that nowadays. His house was just crazy. And I just remember that waterbed because I'd never heard of a waterbed. And you as a kid, and this is my experience, and I jumped on the waterbed, like every kid does, like full snow angel, spread eagle, jump on it. That really hurts. Don't do that on a waterbed. It's like a belly flop.
It's an indoor belly flop. It's for sure.
It's no good. Do not do that, children. Of course, if you're a child now and you're near a waterbed, ask your parents why. That's what you should do. Anyway. So, Ravi, you are a startup founder, which just happens to make you a perfect guest for this show. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks a ton for having me on, guys.
So tell me a little bit about, let's just start with your company. What does it do? And then we'll talk about your journey.
Yeah, so Sutro is a robotics platform. We build a robot to tell you if your water is safe. That's kind of our vision, our mission. Our first product is for swimming pools and spas. So if you have a pool, a spa, a hot tub in your backyard,
waterbed.
I don't know how you'd get it inside there. The Sutro is kind of big, but if you could fit it inside the waterbed, we'd measure the water chemistry of your waterbed. All streamed to your app, so you can know if your waterbed's safe or not to sleep on, I guess.
Perfect. So where did this idea come from? Is this your idea? Did you buy something and create a company around it? Where does this all come from?
Yeah, two tangential threads. The first is my dad used to own a chain of pool and spa supply stores, Southern California. So imagine sunny Los Angeles growing up down here. Started off from testing people's pools, running at my dad's pool store. Fast forward to when I was actually running a small venture capital fund in India. Well, I should say I was an associate at a venture capital fund in India. A lot of the deal flow that we had coming in was around water filtration. And one of the things we started asking all the founders is you're building all these water filters, but you're not doing anything with water sensing, right? How do you know what you're filtering for if you don't know what's wrong with the water? And water is used for a multitude of different things, from farming to drinking to swimming pools. And so we built our first sensor in India. Stupidest idea a startup can do. Don't try selling to the Indian government. You'll probably wait longer to meet somebody and your funding will dry up before you even get something in front of the guy you need to talk to. And so we came back to the US. ended up pivoting the technology and said, hey, water sensing's water sensing. The same water's in your swimming pool that was in that drinking water. Let's go ahead and adjust the sensor array to basically measure swimming pools. And oh, by the way, I grew up in the pool industry, right? And so that whole kind of narrative ended up coming together. And we said, let's go ahead and deploy products in the pool industry where we can get more dollars per unit from wealthier pool owners and then do the drinking water stuff later. And so that's kind of how the idea came to be.
So you have been, according to LinkedIn, you've been doing this for about 6 years. Is that correct?
About 7 now. Yeah, I think it's close to 7 years now.
Nice. And so are you still only swimming pools, or have you moved into the drinking water world?
So we're still only swimming pools. We got acquired 4 years ago by a large chemicals company in Canada. And so they helped us really commercialize the technology, right? I mean, building hardware is hard. And so you need a lot of financial capital, a lot of resources to get the thing made and then delivered to people's homes. And so we're coming on year 4 of our product launch now. And so this year is the first year that we're actually going to start exploring these other markets with cooling water towers, drinking water, agricultural water. And so we are doing a bit of a exploration in the next year to figure out exactly where we should go next.
Okay, so let me back up here a little bit. So you grew up in the pool world, which is so funny that we started with Waterbeds totally randomly. That had nothing to do with anything. But here we are. Yeah, that was totally planned, everybody. Totally planned. So I'm thinking of my dad's old pool. So I remember the guy coming out, and the way they test water is they would grab a little vial, put like 3 drops, shake it, and that was the only time they ever touched it, right?
Yeah,
that was tested.
Yellow and red.
And to see what your pH levels were, right? And so you are in the pool industry. You realize, hey, they're doing filters, but they're not sensing the water to see if the filters are doing their job. That seems like a weird thing. So you decided, let's build a hardware company. Of course, that is, as you said, incredibly hard. I was just mentoring a group of high school students who did this really cool program. This is not a plug, but it was a cool program called LaunchX, where a bunch of international kids come to, in this case, they came to NC State, and they build a startup with other kids from all over the world. It was crazy. And so I came in, a few times during the process to help mentor the kids. And a lot of them wanted to build a hardware thing. And I was like, guys, if you want a real product, a real thing to do here, don't go hardware. It's just a nightmare, and there's so much to it. And I think a lot of people miss that. And so did you know that going into it, or is this something you were like, like all these kids are, whatever, hardware, I'll just do it?
Yeah, I just, you see a problem and you build a solution for it, right? And so hardware, software, AI, these things are vehicles to get to the end game of solving a problem you're trying to solve. Is hardware more difficult than software? Exponentially, right? I mean, you have to literally build physical atoms and put things together versus, bits on a computer.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you a question. A lot of times in startups or small businesses, when you get to the place where the idea is formed into something that you have to build, whether it is software or hardware, of course, funding, money, that's always kind of the big blocker there. So you need to produce a product, you need to produce the MVP, the minimal, viable product, but you don't really want to spend much, or you don't have enough to spend. I can see that being like the main hindrance in getting like good engineers and at least a good build for any kind of hardware. Software, we see this all the time in our end, since we're in software, that a lot of companies will just go with, the cheapest option, which usually means hiring someone out that they don't really know, they're not really 100% confident in, or they're going through a third party to get to these developers. And then it's just like trying to put a puzzle together where the pieces don't quite fit. Is it even worse in hardware if you don't have the right people building? Because that's something you mentioned, you would hire better engineers at first.
Yeah, I think my kind of point there is more around being agile, right? With hardware, you can do the same thing you're doing with software, but in hardware, there's a way to actually like take off the shelf things, right? Like you can take an off the shelf board, you can have an off the shelf sensor. It really breaks down to, are you solving the problem correctly? And are you doing it in the quickest way possible? Right? Like, so for example, we stepped out very early on trying to build this sensor from scratch. And that's like tackling a million problems, right? You're trying to figure. We use a technology called microfluidics, which is even more complicated. So now we're like looking at core science. We have like chemistry going on, and then we're having to build that from scratch, putting that into a vehicle that's going to take the data off of it and put it through Wi-Fi onto your app. And then we have to build an entire app, right? So we haven't even come to the app yet. And then we have to like build an entire app. What we probably should have done very early on is taken an off-the-shelf technology that exists and deployed like 5 of those units instead of tackling the entire chain of building this horribly complicated chemistry plus the actual hardware plus the software in itself. And so I think when I say, finding capable engineers, I meant more around finding engineers that can look at the actual problem that needs to get solved at that moment versus tackling the entire like plethora of problems that we should be tackling in the grand scheme of things, which makes it even that much more complex, which means where do you actually spend the dollars that you're raising on the hardcore chemistry part, on the app part, on making it a piece of hardware. And so that's what we kind of, didn't actually attack the right way, is what I would say.
Okay.
When I think of most hardware companies that I've worked, startups very early on, nowadays they're always starting with some sort of Raspberry Pi or something like that with wires sticking out of it just to see if the thing will work. It's a great way to start. But I'm just imagining you, but now I got to put this thing in water. It's like a whole nother level. I've got my Raspberry Pi with wires stuff at, and now I'm going to put it in my Ziploc bag.
I was just going to say Ziploc and twist ties, and
we ended up having otter boxes, and we took epoxy and just like shut all the wires inside there. So, we had like awesome. A little hole where there was a tube outside that would just suck the water up, and that was our first prototype entirely. Yeah,
very cool.
Nice.
So I want to take another step back. So I love this. We're talking hardware. We're talking about the difficulties of it. But one of the things we like to focus on is people. I like to think our audience, it's not like I can go and talk to my audience. So I like to think my audience is people who are thinking of joining and starting their own thing. They're probably still working. And they're thinking of to dive off. And so I like to focus and ask founders the initial, first year. You have the idea. Now, did you have capital? Did you bootstrap it? Like day one, were you working a real job and supporting yourself on the side? Like, where were you in your life?
Yeah, there was definitely bootstrapping. I was working a day job at a boutique consulting firm that did building efficiency management. So, like LEED certifications and stuff. That's what I was basically doing for the large buildings in San Francisco. And when we first started building it out, we ended up basically doing a concept that's called concierging. Concierging basically means that there's initially this problem, right? We asked this question: will people trust in a floating robot to measure their water chemistry? And will they look at an app to basically follow those instructions? We're trying to solve those 2 major problems. Now, you can go out and solve those 2 issues a ton of different ways. What we ended up doing initially was we first had to find these people, right? So back then, it was really easy to get into nextdoor.com, which was the Facebook for, neighborhoods. And so I logged into Nextdoor. San Rafael, Marin County is a wealthy neighborhood north of San Francisco. I just went onto Google Maps and I figured out you could see homes with pools. I just picked an address and I typed it in, right? Because Nextdoor needs to know your address before they let you in. Tried 2 addresses. They're like, sorry taken. The 3rd address worked. They're like, welcome to Nextdoor. And so I went into Nextdoor and I commented on there, hey, I'm new in the neighborhood, just moved in, have a swimming pool. Anybody have any tips? People started commenting over the course of the weekend, right? Hey, I have a pool guide that I use. I go to this pool store. I do this thing. I do that thing. I now had 10 to 12 potential customers. I came back in 2 days later and I said, hey, there's this cool company in San Francisco. Here's the website. Here's a landing page. What do you think about it? And so people obviously went to my landing page that I'd created. I think out of the 12 people, I ended up getting like 4 people that signed up, left their email on the actual website. The rest of them were like, hey, this idea is stupid. This idea is cool. I totally would buy this thing. I could fire my pool guy. I don't have to go to the pool store. And so I took these 4 email addresses, and 2 of them actually, or 3 of them ended up picking up the phone. I got 2 of them to actually pay for a beta unit. At that point in time, we actually didn't even have a beta unit. And so we went out there and we concierged again, right? With these two people to validate, if I put this robot inside of your swimming pool and told you what to do with your swimming pool, would you follow along? And so we walked inside there, and obviously we didn't have the hardware. We didn't have the app built. We were testing a prototype of it, but it wasn't ready for prime time to give him. I didn't want to lean on that to give him chemistry information. And so basically I became a pool boy as I was back in LA. And I would drive around in validating the actual hardware. And then I would take that data and basically just text them. I'd say, hey, Sutro here. Looks like your pH is off. Go ahead and put in, half a gallon of acid. Text back done when done. And they would just text back done. That gave me over the course of the next 4 weeks a real solid loop of understanding. Now that we have this product inside here and people are actually listening to this information, I went back and actually did interviews. I said, hey, we put this thing inside your swimming pool. The robot is telling you what to actually put inside your swimming pool. I'm going to take this away. How disappointed would you be if I grabbed this technology away from you right now? And I just took it away. I refunded your money and we called it a day. And from behind, they're actually in both cases, one had a husband and one had the wife. I was working with the wife on one house and the husband on the other. Their spouses came out. They were like, please, please, please don't do that. Like, we had my daughter's second birthday party last weekend, and this is the cleanest the pool has ever been. So like, please leave this. Like, we'll pay you whatever we need to keep this technology in there. And that's when we realized we actually had a model. So we did that again a few more times. We had about 50 people in the course of the next 2 months that we actually had built up. And that's actually how we raised our first $500,000. We said, look, we've validated this idea. We've put in a prototype of the technology. I have 50 customers that are willing to pay for this thing, and they have. We need more money to actually build out the technology, hire the engineers, and scale this thing so we can get it into every pool across the US. And so that's kind of my story of the first year of how we raised our first $500,000 and how we initially bootstrapped.
Man, I tell you, that's like a whole dissertation right there on how to start a startup. I love that, man. That's like growth hacking. I mean, the whole bit is like you just checked all those boxes.
There was no issues, no speed bumps. Like,
I mean, of course, right? The robot would sink in the water. I mean, there was a ton of stuff that was going wrong, but we had those two questions up on the board, and that's like the only two things we kept on going back to. Of will people trust a robot in their swimming pool, and will they follow the instructions that we give them, and then later on actually buy chemicals from us, right? And so those were like the 2.5 to 3 variables that we were really testing.
So one of the things we talk about a lot is what we call the slog, which is the time it takes for you to start your idea when no one cares, and to the point where you have your own gravity, meaning people are now coming to you because they think you're going to solve whatever your problem is, right? They know your name. I mean, generally, gravity takes a while, but it sounds like you didn't really have a slog. You went straight in there and found customers immediately before you even had an app. So did you ever have a time where you're like, I am yelling in the winds and no one cares? Or did you just constantly, I know I can grow this. I'm going to add another couple of people and another couple of people?
I mean, I think the slog is an everyday thing, right? You wake up every day, and in my story, right? Again, as Gary pointed out, I didn't paint the kind of ups and downs of that entire journey. It looked like a very straight line from A to B. But while you're doing this, and even still today, it is a slog, right? We have a commercially viable product. Is the price point too high? It's a question we ask. Like, could we get more users if we lowered that? Well, I have to, since we got acquired, there still is a slog of going to my board to say, hey, I need a budget increase to go ahead and basically subsidize these units, because I have a hypothesis that if we come in with a lower price point, we're going to sell more units, right? And again, I think there's slogs across the spectrum. It just depends on how you're defining it. And so if we kind of go back to your first question of what was the slog when you were first starting, the slog is definitely way more real then, but it's also way more freeing, right? Because if you don't have anybody you're necessarily reporting to, if you don't have a product out there, you don't have customers that are buying it, there's also a little bit less responsibility on your shoulders. And so from that standpoint, like, yes, there is a slog because nobody knows about it, but then also it is a little bit more freeing. I guess some examples of slog was raising our first round, right? Raising that first $500,000. Overall, what I would say, you have on average a 5 to 7% close rate, right? Back then when I was raising, I think it's probably a little bit different now. If you put AI in your name, you have a 50% close rate. If you're building
And this
hardware, you have
was
a
in
2%
San
close rate.
Francisco?
This was in San Francisco, yeah.
Okay.
And so from that standpoint, right, there is a sales process you also run from a fundraising standpoint. If you're trying to raise $500,000 and if you have a 10% close rate, you need to have $5 million in exposure at a 90% probability of closing all of those people, right? Because then eventually you're going to land at that 10% close rate that gives you 500K. And so that's the slog, right? Driving up and down Sand Hill Road, basically having 9 out of 10 people tell you no, and finally hitting that 10 so you can raise that $500,000. There's slog in looking for Chinese factories when we were first building out this thing, right? We spent a good 30 to 40% of our first 2 years in China, in Shenzhen, trying to find factories that would take this product, right? Because a factory wants to make money from selling stuff. You're this little founder that walks in there and they're like, yeah, you want what, 3,000 units? Like, we're making the Samsung Wi-Fi chip here on the other line that's selling tens of millions of units every single year.
Yeah.
I don't even care about your business, right? Go to the next factory. And so in every one of these aspects, whether you're fundraising, whether you're looking for customers, whether you're looking for people to work for you, there is a slog. And you're right, people don't know your name. And when they do, then they come to you. And then the slog is, how do you find the right people? Because everybody's coming to me, right? And so there is kind of always this redefinition of it as you get to the next plateau on where you're going to.
So let's go back to your story. So you've got you work. How long did it take you to get those 50 people before you were starting to think money?
It took, well, we started thinking money very early on, but when we first started talking to the investors, we realized that their number one thing that they value in terms of risk is market, right? They're like, do we as an investor even know that people want to buy this thing? Because investors invest in a bunch of different things. And so one day they're investing in ride sharing company Uber, and the next day they're like looking at a pool product, right? It's very difficult for an investor outside of them being in a particular vertical to actually know if an idea is going to be successful or not. And the real signal there is customers, is users. And so then becomes this chicken and egg question of how do you get users if you don't have a product, which is where you arrive at this next door strategy that we ended up building for ourselves, right? I think there's a strategy that's different for every product, depending on the founder, depending on the market. And so we took about 2.5 months to get to 50 users. Back to your first question. We ended up raising our first 50K 5 months after that, which came through an accelerator. And I think the first $500,000 probably came like a year after that, give or take. So I think in the course of a year, we had gotten to 50 customers, gotten our first 50K, gotten into an accelerator, and raised our first $500,000.
Okay. What's interesting, one of the things we talk about a lot and advise a lot when we're talking to our clients and stuff is to go and do your idea for free. And in your case, you can't totally do that because you have a gizmo, but if you're software, one of the things I find that a lot of really early startup people just don't want to do, and I think it's just because they're too excited, I'm not sure, but they want to come to me or the people like me and say, build me an app right now. I can build me an app. I'm like, you don't need to spend this bazillion dollars. It's not really bazillion, but this big chunk of money to build an app when you have no idea if there's an idea here. And so we say no pretty regularly because someone will come to us with an idea and they're not ready to give us money because the idea doesn't have a market. It doesn't. I'm like, go figure those things out and then come back because we love your money, but I don't want to waste your money. You're not ready for me. The worst thing I can do is build an app and then I spend all your money and it's a bad idea and it dies. That to me is, I don't want to do that, right? And so it's refreshing to hear. I mean, again, you're in a slightly different world because there's a gizmo, so you can't do it totally for free, but you can get pretty close with some OtterBoxes, right? But you're going out there and you're proving your idea out before you drop some real cash, and that is a step that so many startups seem to skip over. And I'm like, guys, this is dumb, right? You're about to invest, if nothing else, take the money aside. You're about to invest your time, which is your most precious resource. Right? You're going to throw down 2 years of your life waiting to see if you have an idea when you can answer that right now. Most startups, when they're talking about pure software, are two-sided markets. Classic example, like Airbnb is classic two-sided market. And you can do that with a spreadsheet and a phone, right? You can do your entire app, call side A, call side B, put them together, cell phone, boom, done. No tech. And no one wants to do that. I think they feel that's too cold call-y. I'm not sure what it is, but that the number of people who just like, no, I know this is going to work. Build me an app. I mean, eventually, if that's what you want and you want to avoid, we're going to take the money, but we don't
Sure.
want to, I mean, at some point we have to keep our lights on if you're going to be that way, but we really don't want you to go that route. And we will advise against it. So I love hearing that, that you took the hard route, I think the right route.
Very clever route
So let's
of
fast forward.
validating the idea. Yeah.
So you've now raised money. How did that go? Was that obviously, unless you know a lot of rich people, that's not friends and family, that's angels, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, it's angels. It's a few larger investors, or I would say larger at the time because we were seed stage or pre-seed. Um, it again, I think I would define that as the slog, right? That was the 1 in 10 investors are gonna write the check. Having that exposure, when I say exposure, I mean your Excel sheet should be filled with 5 million worth of deals because you're only going to get 500,000, right? And so just knocking on doors, getting those intros. How do you get the intros, right? If you talk to other founders, they may not want to introduce you to an investor because that becomes competitive. Going to networking events, sneaking into Salesforce, force.com conferences and hanging out at the Hyatt Hotel, seeing who's sitting around there to see who you can end up bumping shoulders into. I mean, that's the slog, right? And so that's a lot of what we went through in our first year raising that first $500,000. And then, like you said, once it does become a little bit easier and people do know your name and you have a little bit more validation out there, it becomes slightly easier to raise a little bit larger checks. But then again, you're in the next weight class. You're competing with the next group of people that are also going for the next 5 million, 10 million, $15 million round. And now your exposure has to be 150 million because you're only going to close 15 million. Right. And so that's kind of what I was saying earlier is it's just a fractal. You're like at the next step in the next weight class. And there's just as great amount of people in that same weight class that you're going to be competing against. And you hit the reset button and start the slog all over again. It's just at a different scale.
So, okay. So we continue on. So you got your $500,000. What did you do with that? You invested that in the product? Did you start building? I mean, you were talking about, you had all of these pieces. You had chemistry, you have the robotics, you have the app. Did you have enough money to do all of that, or did you focus that? Where did you go from there?
We initially started focusing on getting the chemistry right. And so that was around that microfluidic technology. And so we just basically zoomed into how do we create defensibility around the hardware by building a microfluidic chemistry chip that can measure chemistry properly. And 10 times better than the remaining technologies out there. And what the metric first initially turned into do people trust a robot and will they listen to our chemistry information, turned into how do we make a microfluidic chip that's 10 times better than the remaining technology out there. And so we always had this 10x number all across the office on making sure that we could actually build the chemistry properly. And we spent probably a good 300 to 400K on building out that microfluidic chip technology, filed some patents, and then we ended up raising, I think, close to another $1 million right after that, before we actually got acquired. And so it was kind of a quick line to our acquisition at that point in time.
So what led up to the acquisition? Like you're a startup, you own you're the primary guy, you're doing your own company, you're the boss. What inspired you to be like, hey, let's get bought?
We were in the midst of raising our Series A, and because we had the technology kind of well built out at that point in time, we were working on some OEM partnerships. We were raising a Series A. And so in the midst of raising that Series A, one of the strategics basically came to us and said, look, we have enough money to basically cover your entire Series A, but we don't want to buy a percentage of the company. Like we see value against our distribution channel, against our, water chemistry management around drinking water, around agricultural water, around swimming pools. And you guys have this pool product, but we totally see your vision of scaling it across the rest of verticals in water. And we cater to those verticals in water with our chemicals. And so we, spoke to the investors, kind of tossed it around. Had a bit of a bidding war because, I just wanted to be a fiduciary. I wanted to be fiduciarily responsible to make sure that we got the best deal. And then we just made the decision to say, hey, look, this is probably the best home for the technology. Let's go ahead and work with these guys up in Canada to, have them acquire the company.
And you stayed with the company, clearly. How is it having a boss again?
Oh, it's awesome. Actually, I very much appreciate it because one, it's a great learning experience, right? In beginning to scale the technology, I'm starting to move into a little bit more of an operator role. And being in a much larger company where they've really ironed out operations, because that's what great, big companies are great at, has been a great learning experience because I've moved from like a startup CEO to being more of a Series A or B or maybe even a Series C CEO at this rate in time. In making sure that I'm managing people, I'm managing supply chains. We have we're managing incident reporting now, right? Like, how do you spin up multiple servers because we have tens of thousands of users to make sure that stuff doesn't crash? Like that was never a problem because we didn't have that many users. And so it's just a lot of these sort of scaling issues, which is great being a part of a large company because we can basically learn that while we're sitting nested under them.
What I guess the final step here for me, at least when I'm putting these odds together, and maybe you can't answer this because this is going to be a weird question, but what's next? Like, are you one of these serial entrepreneur guys who's going to be like, all right, I made an agreement to work for this company for 3 to 5 years, whatever that is. When that's done, I'm going to go and do this again because I loved this whole process. Or I love water. I love doing stuff with water. I'm going to ride this sucker. Where are you sitting?
Yeah, I mean, I started this entire thing back in India when I was at that VC fund. And it started with the vision of water is just going to be one of the next problems that we face as a species. Like, we saw that in India coming on a billion person population. The US has its own problems. I mean, there's Flint, Michigan, kids are
We still
drinking
have
water
lead
with
pipes.
lead.
Yeah.
Like, we have drought issues in California.
I mean, California and the Colorado River. Yeah, that's a big
My
one.
gosh, and then it over rains over here, and we have mudslides. Like, I just think this word water is going to be a problem, and I've always thought that, and figuring out how to manage it is going to be the next solution. Whether that's through Sutro inside of this company, I don't quite know the direction. However, the path that I'm walking down now does open my eyes to a lot of what is going on in water and how I can better solve it. And so I think there's a vehicle in using the acquisition to basically boil up Sutro to be even larger, to get into even more places so we can actually inflict kind of even larger change on the way that we look at water. I'm in the process of moving to New York, right? So I think there's a
Very
lot
different water
of
problems there.
there's a lot of water problems there. There's also a lot of money around water, right? Wall Street, a lot of the larger private equity funds, a lot of the hedge funds. Water is a large dollar amount sort of thing because you need infrastructure. You're literally moving molecules and pipes. And then there's DC, right? I mean, policy. Water is such a weird thing because it's like electricity, like the internet. It's an infrastructural problem, and that's very well defined by policy. So really, kind of reflecting back on that question of what's next for me, where I'm at right now really opens my eyes to what could be next. I don't really have an answer on whether I'm going to start something next, whether I'm going to do something with the acquirer, or if this particular path that I'm on actually opens up even more opportunities within itself. And
Sure.
so, yeah, could kind of go any which direction.
When you mentioned New York, one of the things that was so weird, we went to New York last year, and everyone in New York, it's like Texas. People in Texas love talking about Texas. People in New York like to talk about their water. They're like really rabid about their public, just regular water from the tap is the best water in the world. And like the bagels, you can't make these bagels anywhere else because we have New York water. And I'm like, it was water. I'm no expert, but it was like, okay, it's tasty. It's great. Good job. But they're rabid about their water there. It's whatever they're, and apparently, and I don't know anything about this. You probably do. It's quite a feat to do what they do every single day because there's so many people and so much water, and the fact that it is so clean and so good is quite an engineering feat. But anyway, just anecdotally, it was really interesting. You mentioned New York, and they're like, yeah, they're really serious about their water over there. So I imagine, but there's no swimming pools, so you're going to be unless you go out of the city.
We ask everybody that comes on the show the same question at the end. Your journey seems to have been, other than the slog daily, your journey, you seem to have made some of the right moves. So I'm sure your 3 pieces of advice are going to be pretty good. So what would be 3 pieces of advice you would tell any entrepreneur or new business about how to get going and how to go from starting the idea to being on the right path for success in their business?
The first is find the right people to surround yourself with. And when I say people, I mean people that are investors, people that are your colleagues, your founders, your employees, and people that are your customers too, because people really make the business go round. The second I would say is don't be afraid of rejection, because the whole goal of entrepreneurship is continuous rejection, right? The whole finding 150 million exposure so you can raise 15 million, you're going to get 9 no's before you get 1 yes, and that's just part of the game. Back to what David was saying of validate your idea. I interview or I mentor a bunch of founders, and many of them I just seem to be scared to, like you said, pick up the phone and call 10 customers to see if somebody will buy that thing, because they just have this idea in their head that they need to make it before they actually get it out there. So fear, yeah, don't be afraid of rejection would be the second. And the third would be to keep focus. A lot of entrepreneurs, and even us very early on, wanted to tackle everything all at one time. You only have 10 working hours in a day, right? If you're a crazy dude, maybe you can go for 10 hours, right? Or 12 hours. But overall, if you think of those 10 hours and if you want to do something that's going to really make a difference in moving the ball forward, you have to stay focused. And so it's really, back down. I said this a few times. We had statements written up around the office in our, on the walls of what are we attacking this month? What are we attacking this week? What are we going to attack today? And I think, yeah, keeping focus would be my third, of really whittling it down to that, like, one thing you can do today, this week, this month.
One thing, my kids are teenagers, older teenagers, and one of the things that they have both said, and I even ran this by some of our guys who work for us, and they're all in their 30s, right? Early 30s. And they won't pick up the phone at all. Like there is a fear just to make the phone call to a stranger. Absolutely no way. Never going to happen. So I can totally see that. Don't be afraid to just reach out and talk to people. I think that's going to become more and more critical advice, because startups are not going to change. I mean, the technology, what they're building, this, that, and the other, but startups of all ilks is all about people. At the early stage, it's all about meeting the right people, networking with the right people, investors, whatever you want to call it. But it's a relational thing. Entrepreneurs are relational; they have to be. So you got to get over that fear. If you're a young person, you got to pick up that phone. You just got to get over that. So I think that's really spot on advice.
So, Ravi, if anybody else wants to learn more about your business, the products that you make, you said you're moving into other fields just than swimming pools. So if they want to keep an eye on that, what's the best way to either find out more about your business or get in touch with you?
Yeah, you can find out more about the pool business at mysutro.com. That's mysutro.com. And if you're interested in learning more about the other stuff we're doing on water, you can definitely follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I post a lot of the updates. So if you just probably Google Ravi Kurani Sutro LinkedIn, you'll definitely find me.
Yeah, we'll put those links in the show notes for sure.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ravi. This has been a lot of fun. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, guys.
And if anybody else wants to ask us questions, leave any comments or snide remarks, you can email us at hello@thebigpixel.net, or you can leave a comment below this video or reach out to us on any one of our social media channels. Just look for Big Pixel.
All right. And with that, we are out. We will see everyone next week. Thanks again for joining us.